Now let's take a look at how we can work with select boxes and radio buttons. We'll start off with select boxes. On my page I have a select box for the state, and the user can obviously use the pull down menu and choose a state. If we open up the developer tool so we can see what's happening, and if I inspect this element, you can see that this select tag has a ID of s-state, and then each of the options have values that is a abbreviation of their particular state. So we're going to go into the console, and what we'll do is we're going to use pretty much the same method that we used on text fields. We're going to use the get element by ID again, and I'll put the string for the select box in there. And if I go ahead and run, you can see that it is indeed selecting that select box. Now if I want to find out what the value is, I'll add the .value property, and you can see that it's going to give me the property of the selected state. So if we switch that to something else and we run this again, you can see that now it's passing on Oregon instead of Washington. Now with pop-up menus, you have the values that are being displayed in the select box, and then you have the value that's being returned. Let me just show you why these are different. I'm going to go back into my elements tag, and I'm just going to change the HTML temporarily, so I'll just get rid of the value on Oregon. And we'll go back to the console, and if I run my get element by ID again, you can see that now it's giving me a value of Oregon as opposed to OR. So generally speaking, when you're setting these up and getting ready to manipulate the values later programmatically, it's nice to have a simpler value than some of these longer ones. If I chose California, for instance, the item that would populate for here, if I got rid of the actual value, the shorthand value that we're using, would be California space parentheses 7.5% tax, and that would be quite long for us to have to continually use that. It's much nicer for us just to have the abbreviation of CA. So I just wanted to demonstrate this so you would understand the difference of not implicitly applying the value and then applying the value, and how they could make our code a little bit easier. Now let's take a look at the radio buttons. So here's my radio buttons, and radio buttons work a little bit differently. It only allows you to have one checked value on your radio buttons. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use our document get element by ID, and let's just verify what the ID is on these. So if I inspect these elements, here's my input tag right here, and you can see that this has an ID of the R method pickup. So each of these radio buttons actually has a separate ID that's specific to that particular radio button, but these are all grouped inside of a div with a class name of method as well as a class name of group. So those will become important as we go through here. Let's go back into the console. So because each of these radio buttons has their own unique ID, we're going to have to use a different method of getting the information. So what I ultimately want to do here is I want to be able to address all of these and then just ask which one of these is checked. So what I need is I need the name property. If we go back to the elements, all of these share the identical name of R underscore method. So it doesn't matter which one you're on, they all have a unique name of R underscore method, and then they have their individual unique IDs associated with them. So the radio buttons share a name, but they have different IDs. So what we can do is we can get the ID of the whole form, and then we can grab the radio buttons out of that. So let's go ahead and let's augment our code so we can do this. So in order to actually do this, we'll create a variable first. I'm just going to create a variable called methods, and then I'm going to make it equal to the get element by ID, and I'm passing on the parameter of the name of my form, cart underscore water, and then I'm going to put dot R method. That's going to get me into the radio button parts of the form. Now if I hit return right now, you can see I get an undefined, and the reason why is because all I've done is create the variable. If I want to have something spit out, I need to call the variable name, and you can see when I call the variable name of methods, then it's going to go ahead and specify the items that are part of that variable. So all three of these are currently being stored inside of this variable. Now, if we look at the first one, you can see that this one has a checked attribute. Now, the checked attribute is not actually what's happening because I have the US mail is the one that's checked, and you can see that this one does not have the checked attribute. This checked attribute is actually a result of when the page is initially loaded. So if we refresh our page, you can see that pickup is the one that is currently checked. So if we run that again, you can see that it is showing checked, but if I change the checked box to something else, that does not change. So what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the checked property of the group, not the checked attribute. The checked attribute is what happens when the page is initially loaded. We want the checked property. This is a subtle difference, but it is one that will affect what we want to do. We're looking for the current state of things in terms of the DOM, the document object model. So what we need to do in order to get this information is we're going to need to create a loop, and we're going to need to loop through these items and figure out which one is actually checked. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a loop. So first I need my variable that's going to track the elements in the array, and because I'm going to run the first one to the last one, I'm going to start with 0. Then I'm going to run this loop from 0 until as many times as are in the array. My array is methods, and I need to, you can see when I run methods I get the little brackets right here that appear around the results of this methods call. And what I need to do is I need to also pass on I++. And what the plus means is that this is an increment operator, and when I stick the two pluses after the variable name, that just means add 1 to whatever that is. So we're going to be doing this every time that it loops through. So running through all of these, we need to check to see if it's checked. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if methods sub I, that is, if the current item in the methods array that I'm looking on, based on this index of checked. Then we're going to look at the checked property, not at the attribute, but at the property. And we're going to run a condition. So we want to say, if this is true, do something. In this case, I'm not actually inside of a JavaScript file, so I'm just going to run an alert so we can test this right here. So what we're going to say is if, and then we're going to ask methods sub I, if the checked property is set to true, then we're going to have an alert, and it's going to post the value of the one that's checked. So in this case we're going to use methods sub I, and we're going to run value. So once we have this typed, if we go ahead and hit return, you can see that I do get an alert and it states USPS, which is the radio button that's checked. If we close that and we switch this to a different radio button and we run the loop again, you can see that now it's giving me a new alert message. So this looping method is going through the radio buttons and it's figuring out which one is currently selected. This is a little awkward. It would be nice if we could just get the property, but unfortunately this does not currently exist. So this is the way that we'll have to get this information. So when you're working with radio buttons, you need to use this method or something similar in order to get the values out of the form field.